Here are some photos of some carvings that I've completed in the past. This project is laminating of a block that will be a carved eagle that will be attached to a branch on a carved door. Here I'm joining the boards to get them nice and flat so that when I clamp them together there won't be any gaps. As you can see, I'm using push blocks to keep my hands well away from the spinning blade. Here I'm positioning the pattern on the board. As you can see, there's some knots. I want to position the pattern so I can utilize the board the best I can without having the knot be in the middle of the carving. I'm going to do 3 layers, and each layer I'm laminating together. I need to position the pattern on it and then index the pieces so that when I cut it out later, I won't be cutting through a knot in the center board that I won't be able to see after it's glued together. So in this case I have an index on my pattern, mark index, and I also have an index on my board. And each board has the same index. So when I glue them together, I'll use this index to line them up because they're going to want to slide when they've got glue on them. And I'll also index my pattern to it, and I go ahead and lay it out and cut it. Here I'm applying Titebond 2 glue to the surface to laminate the layers together. I like to use Titebond 2 with alder because the color matches pretty well. It's almost completely waterproof unless you're using it in an area where it's going to be exposed to water all the time. And on a front door, especially a carved front door, it should be protected enough that you're not going to have it sitting in water. And this is a really good glue. It sets up fast, it's easy to use, and it's extremely strong. I've tried Gorilla Glue, and I've had bad luck with that. If you don't get an absolutely perfect joint, then it can fail on you because there's no structural integrity to it. I'm just putting on a thin layer. I want enough glue so that it will squeeze out, but not any extra. I also have my clamps ready before I start. I get them all laid out. I've got my index here. These boards are the same width. I don't always have this opportunity, but it's much easier if they're the same width, and you can just line them up flat on the workbench. When you line up your index, with the glue on there, it has a tendency to slip a bit, and you lose your indexing. So I like to use quick grip style clamps in the beginning till initially I get enough of a squeeze where it's not going to move around a lot on me. The quick grip doesn't tend to move the boards too much. When you use a screw clamp, the screwing motion causes the boards to slip more readily because of the way the pressure is applied with the screw part of the clamp. I always like to use a lot of clamps. You never have too many clamps. And it may be overkill, but you don't want gaps in your lamination. Move the quick grip over a little bit here. As you can see, the glue is starting to squeeze out here on this side. and I use deep reach clamps for the center. Make sure I have a tight lamination everywhere. So when you carve into it, you never know where you're going to end up. And if you have a gap in the lamination, it's not going to look very good. The block is going to need to have branches attached to either side of it that the eagle will be sitting on. I'm going to have to glue the branches onto either side of this block after I carve the eagle. In order to do that, I'm going to need a nice clean surface to glue to. So I'm going to join the edges of the board in order to get that nice, smooth, flat surface. That looks pretty good, nice and smooth and flat. Should make for a nice. Here I'm transferring my pattern onto the block with carbon paper. I use the ballpoint pen because it puts more pressure on the carbon and makes for a cleaner transfer. I've got my pattern indexed to my block as I indexed it when I was gluing the block together and allowing for where the knots were within the block. So here I've got my pattern on the board, and I've avoided the knot right there. Now I'm going to cut out the shape of the eagle on the bandsaw. I'm using a bimetal blade, 1/4 inch, that gives me enough rigidity so that it doesn't drip too much through this thick board, but it's still narrow enough that I can get around corners pretty well. There's my eagle pattern. I've tried to stay outside the lines a little bit so that when I can always come back and take that amount of material off, but if you cut in too close you can't put it back, so it's always better to stay a little bit outside the lines and then work in from there. Here's the finished eagle, and here's the finished eagle mounted on the branch and mounted on the door.